Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Professor.
As we have grown to expect, the world gets more and more exciting, especially now that we can see that the Iranians, the Saudis, and the Americans are all fighting on the same side. And people are even saying encouraging things about the Israelis in Gaza, which I haven't had time to read the details of yet. But
they extended the
I'm not,
truce.
I'm not sure I can believe that either of these things are actually going to last in their current form, but at least it keeps us interested. What has been growing in my mind in previous days is all things that we've talked about before, which seem to be becoming more and more important, which is the unevennesses everywhere and the tension and conflict that's arising between communities that are at uneven in their relationship of different stages of development. And I noticed today that Standard & Poor's issued a report claiming that what is hampering America's economic progress now is the inequality in America.
Oh my.
And I hadn't thought about it on that level before, and I wonder whether inequality is in fact greater in America than it is in, for example, Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it may be, though I'm not sure about that. And certainly America is still plagued by events like this, what recently happened in Ferguson. Which, and I don't know of anything quite like that in Europe. So there's that sort of thing in America that seems to suggest inequality that's different from Europe. Anyway, it's interesting to see the suggestion that the unevenness may not be just between national communities and regional economies, but also perhaps between different parts of the economy in a really large national economy.
I'd completely agree with you. I mean, the United States economy is premised in some respects on that inequality. The so-called, dare I say it, the so-called underclass, if you will, the people that generationally seem to progress along the horizontal axis without any uplift, due to education and economic means, or I should say lack thereof, that seems to go on from generation to generation, provides the foundational support in many ways for much of the economy. It's a very challenging environment. And one could very easily and plausibly argue perhaps that it's not unwitting that this horizontal axis remains flat. Because so much of the balance of the economy depends on having workers who are willing to work for minimum wage and not have benefits and are essentially disposable at the beck and call of higher ups. And that's a very unfortunate situation. At least in Europe, government protections have evolved over time to make that situation much more challenging for an employer or for a company.
Yes, well, it's interesting to see that this problem of unevenness may be much more, what should I say, pervasive throughout the different societies in the world than I had previously understood. But something else came to me that may help us to expand this idea. And this was through listening to things at the conference I was at in California last week on Big History, in which we were talking about historical processes at different stages of the history of the universe. And one thing that came out all the time was not only in different stages of human life, but on a larger scale than that there always seems to be a tension between the need for order and the pressure for change. And that seems to be a major part of what's going on in the world today under globalization, because we all need order. We have to know what to expect, otherwise we have nervous breakdowns. Our tolerance of disorder and the degree of order that we need varies enormously, and we're much more flexible in that regard now than we were when we lived in smaller societies.
Mm-hmm.
But as our societies grow, we're suddenly confronted with the need to deal with, to accept more flexibility in the order around us than we're ready for. And that, this provides, I think, another window, another way of seeing what's going on in the unevennesses. So some of us need more order than others. Some of us are more ready to accept flexibility in the order that satisfies our need to be able to know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
But as the rate of change speeds up, increases, we have to be more ready to accept flexibility in the order around us. And those of us who are more privileged find it easier, and those of us who are less privileged find it more difficult, I think.
Well, it's funny you said that, because I was just going to put my flaming liberal hat on and argue the opposite. I was going to say that the inequality that you referenced earlier, the lower end of the spectrum economically and educationally, seems to have been buffeted about even before globalization became prominent at a far faster pace than the upper economic classes. And they seem, at least from my perspective, to be, maybe it's because we don't hear from them that much, except in various manifestations, whether it be angry rap music, whether it be violent movies, whether it be whatever cultural phenomenon reaches us. They seem to be able to deal with it in stride, whereas order, with the disruption of order with the more economically affluent classes, does seem to strike some terror into the hearts of people, both subjectively and collectively. That was my initial reaction. I was wondering, when you were in California, had you had any ongoing discussion about the rate of change and its effect on differing statuses of inequality within a society such as the U.S.?
No, I don't think we touched on that sort of thing there, but I would say in relation to what you just said that I think if you talk about the global financial situation, then obviously the unpredictability of the current global financial situation is a major concern for the overprivileged parts of modern society. However, if you think of it not on the financial level, but on the purely social level,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the relationships that people depend upon and their ability to form new relationships and to be flexible in the way they see their daily lives as socially constituted, they have a much greater tolerance for less rigid order than people who are less privileged, who are desperate to hold on to the relationships they have. So, we have this tendency in the modern world to privilege finance above everything else, as though the finance and
Is all that matters, right?
And people in finance and economists, although they know that everything depends on what people do, nevertheless, they tend to focus for their analyses totally on finance and economic data rather than what motivates people who make the decisions that affect the data.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's because perhaps that the matrices and the data, the metrics involved in economic data is far more tangible, perhaps, than in other areas. So it makes it perfect fettle for those types to go ahead and do those analyses. Yeah, I would agree with you, though.
And Putin at the moment may be a good example to illustrate the difference, because he seems to be more concerned about relationships than the economic factors. All the criticism of what Putin is doing at the moment on the Western side is he's ruining his economy by what he's doing. Look what he's exposing himself to financially.
But I think that would, not to interject, but wouldn't that sort of go along with what I was saying, is that on the more affluent level of the Russian social scale, he's causing massive disruptions, or could be, at least from this distance. That's what one is led to believe.
But in his strategy, he's more concerned with the political relationships that he's dealing with, that he wants to reinforce, that are harking back to the relationships that Russia depended upon in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to prevent the world around him changing out of recognition in a way that he understands to be in favor of people he doesn't have a relationship with.
Right, right. No, that's certainly true. But I'm just wondering, because what he's doing internationally is obviously playing to the lower end of the. I hate to use these adjectives. What he's doing internationally is playing to the lower end of the equality scale, so to speak, in Russia, as compared to the higher end of the equality scale, who might be becoming increasingly nervous about the effects of economic sanctions.
Yeah, yeah. He thinks he can look after his friends economically, and he wants to maintain his political popularity in Russia, and he seems to be getting good popularity ratings in Russia all the time.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting, because those people at the bottom, if you will, in the inequality scale, you would think would be, as a result of increased globalization, beginning to become more aware of what he's doing and what's happening and the changes that are being wrought as a result of those actions. And yet they still seem to be quite passive and, in fact, supportive of what he's doing.
Presumably because they're less integrated into the global system than people outside Russia are.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm not sure about, because I haven't been to Russia recently, but that's my impression from what I read about what's going on there.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you another question, not to switch topics too much, but as we were chatting beforehand, we have a situation now where the Grand Ayatollah in Iran essentially took a page from the White House briefing book, urging Prime Minister al-Maliki to step down, and he just did step down about half an hour ago, the news is indicating. And then the Saudis, of course, are eager to have that happen as well. It's an unusual confluence of parties here.
At the same time, Khamenei gave a speech yesterday saying that there's no point in dealing with the United States.
Oh, really?
Except on specific issues. But, and he's obviously, there have been several readings of the presentation he gave yesterday. But the most interesting is, and I think one that understands the way Persians talk better than most of our journalists in this country do, is that he's talking in a way in order to satisfy all the audiences he's talking to. Mm-hmm. He on the one hand, he's doing things which are very much what we've noted, collaboration with the Saudis and the Americans in ways that he thinks will preserve the Iranian situation in Iraq, taking advantage of the fact that for some reason the Saudis understand that they need to do the same thing, and the Americans similarly. But that shouldn't be interpreted by the hardliners in Iran to mean that he's given up his previous position.
I see.
So the Iranians are playing a very clever game. And meanwhile, all the negotiations continue, and Iran is not really yet giving anything up, and America is not really yet giving anything up. But both America and Iran have terrible difficulty working out how they're going to get to the next deadline in November without getting suffering too much from criticism from the hardliners
Hmm.
in each country.
Hmm. I noted that the Saudis brought in Ban Ki-moon the other day and gave him a $100 million check to fight terrorism.
Yeah.
Need I remind you that 19 of the 20 hijackers on September 11th were Saudis?
Yes, it's very interesting, the game that well, it's not only the Saudis, but the other Gulf Emirates are pouring enormous sums of money into what's going on in the Middle East at the moment. And it's difficult to see, in fact, whether they're all in agreement with each other, or that it just appears to be working towards the same end. But I think the situation in Iraq is going to play out really quite gradually over the coming weeks. The situation between the Yazidi Kurds, the other Kurds, the Islamic State, the Turkoman, the Christians, and the rest of the Sunni community, and then the majority Shia, is becoming very difficult to maintain a comprehensive picture of.
Well, the most optimistic thing I've heard is that the Shia party that had provided the foundation for al-Maliki have begun to publicly say that he has been too harsh with the Sunni minority and has isolated them far too much. I mean, that was like, my goodness, how enlightened. What a wonderful thing to say. Now, if the successor could follow through on that and bring them into the government as in a meaningful way, then things might begin to happen positively.
The new prime minister has an Iranian name. It's Arabicized.
Mm-hmm.
And he became prime minister because of the fact that Sistani, who is the preeminent Shia cleric in Iraq and really has a much higher reputation than any other Shia cleric anywhere, came out of his quietist hiding and started making political recommendations and supported him.
That'll do it.
So this is, if anything, this is doing two things. One, it's exaggerating the confessional polarity, but Sistani is a moderate Shia. So it could have very good long-term implications. However, he's, I think, 83 years old,
mm-hmm.
and we don't know how long it will last, and we haven't heard much recently of the more, what shall I say, aggressive Shia clerics in Iraq, and I'm sure they're not just sitting around and waiting to see what would happen.
It's a very interesting situation. I'm wondering how you see the situation in Gaza playing out. I mean, that must be a very interesting discussion in Cairo between the Israelis and the Palestinians and the Egyptians.
Well, it's very interesting, and it's very complex because each of the parties involved have totally different objectives, which are really compatible. And so it's very difficult to see how they could come to a long-term agreement that would work, unless it's an agreement that somehow gives each of them the ability to continue to negotiate on some sort of equal level. But I can't really see how that could happen.
No, I don't either. I don't think the Israelis would permit that. So it's definitely a very strange time. And then meanwhile, the Pope has popped up in South Korea. He disembarked from his plane. He shook hands with relatives of the South Korean ferry disaster, and then promptly got into the back seat of a small South Korean-made Kia, those small little cars, as part of his ongoing modesty and humbleness kind of thing. And off he went to his next meeting.
So we have the new preeminence of Sistani, the Shia leader, the global extension of the global reach of the new Catholic leader.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, it's coming around, isn't it? And next thing is we'll have Obama doing a Henry IV Canossa thing in front of the Vatican.
well,
Please,
I'm waiting to see who's going to stand up and claim leadership of the atheist community in the world.
well, is it that Margaret Murray or what was her name? That atheist lady. I can't recall her name, but there was a prominent American atheist for many years. I'm sure there was also one in the UK as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I noticed that the Brits have stayed a little bit on the sidelines in this rescue effort of this group in Kurdistan.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I'm not sure what Curzon is aiming at the moment, besides the next election. I imagine that's a major consideration in his mind.
Cameron, you said Lord Curzon.
Did
You
I
had a,
say?
you
I
had
know.
a,
Did I
you,
say Curzon?
you did. You had a slip of the tongue. Curzon was 100 years ago. All right. Well, that's. I think we're at the time. So,
Okay.
all right. Thank you very much, Professor. We'll talk
Bye.
next week.
Bye.
Bye.